Redditors who lived in countries that no longer exist, like Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, etc. What was it like to see your country break up? When Czechoslovakia separated into Czech Republic and Slovak Republic, I was quite young and had no idea what was going on. But then suddenly, they started teaching us slightly different geography at school. But apart from that and a few bitter remarks from some adults, that was all. What I do remember, though, is that almost all the textbooks we got in school were written in the time of Czechoslovakia and no one bothered to change them for up-to-date versions. So we were often asked to cross out Czechoslovakia from the text and write Czech Republic above it, or draw a thick line between Czech and Slovak republics in a map. That was during the first 9 years of school, at least. Otherwise, I think Czechs and Slovaks have still quite the brotherly relationship. For example, there is a huge amount of Slovak students in Czech universities, who later stay to work. I mean, to enroll at KVUT you need to, among others, provide a report card from a Czech or Slovak school, if you graduated abroad, except Slovakia, some extra paperwork, take a Czech exam if you're a foreigner, except from Slovakia. My parents lived in Bosnia before the Yugoslavian war. They finished building their family home for them and my siblings who were babies back then in 1988 or 1989. And now imagine being forced to move away from your newly built life with 2 young children a year later. I was born in Austria in 1992 and I remember being poor as a child. Poor but happy. My mother's educational degrees were not to be found, were not accepted in Austria, basically restricting her possible jobs to being a cleaning lady after being the manager of a Yugoslavian market chain. I remember the first time we visited the old house after the war in 1998 I think. I remember seeing the house full of bullet holes, one corner of the house blown away by tank grenades. I remember finding my brother's old toys trampled into the dirt in the front yard. I remember my mother finding an old dress of hers in their former bedroom, hardened by the exposure to the elements. I vividly remember her sitting on the stairs in front of the main entrance, silently crying. My point is, it is often not so much about seeing your country break apart, but much rather about seeing the life, dreams and hopes you left behind rot like the old green velvet dress she loved so much. I was born at the end of the Bosnian War, 1995. Following the breakup of Yugoslavia, CCA 1992, so I can't remember the breakup, but I remember the post-breakup post-war years. Having very little money, the city Sarajevo was bombed to crap, and 95% of buildings either had bullet holes or were torn down. I remember watching German channels like Togo, and all the cool toys the German kids had, that you couldn't buy in my country at the time. My dad drove a Yugo 55. Google it. The bodywork on that car was full of shrapnel holes. He replaced the engine. Later, my dad did the bodywork on the car himself, but he didn't have money for car paint, so he painted it with paint used for mailboxes. No supermarkets, only small stores and markets. Now the country looks and feels like any other European country, but back then it was a whole different story. I had a foreign exchange student from Latvia. He said his family made a lot of money because they sold a tank left on their property. I lived in Moscow before the USSR got dissolved. One thing that was jarring in the aftermath was the emergence of a lot of Western chains we previously had no exposure to. I remember going to my first McDonald's in 1991. A funny anecdote I heard is that the service staff had to be trained to act more friendly, like they would in American restaurants. To be fair, it was a stressful and uncertain period. A funny anecdote I heard is that the service staff had to be trained to act more friendly, like they would in American restaurants. Yes, then, they had to train them to not act as friendly, because it was creeping people out. I was born just around the dissolution of Czechoslovakia, but I have heard from many people who experienced it that it was very peaceful. Basically, Slovakia wanted their own state because they are a separate nation and their language is different, though we understand each other, and they also were not thrilled that all the political decisions were being made in Prague. So Slovakia was a bit forgotten at times. Our two countries still have very good relationships, and although we make fun of each other, we are buddies. Most of you guys anyway. Had a Slovakian builder working next door UK and he was like, I like most people but I hate Czech people. I'm like, calm down man, seems a bit weird to go to the UK where there will also be Czech people and be like, hey, I hate you. I was born in the USSR 2 months before it collapsed, so I don't personally remember anything, but my parents do. Everything was basically chaos. Most of the businesses that were previously funded by the government had no chance of competing with Western businesses, so many of them went bankrupt, and that meant that lots of people including my father lost their jobs. And lots of unemployment then led to lots of crime. The 90s were a crazy time full of riots, crimes and violence in many former Soviet countries. My Latvian friend was born in 1987, when Latvia was USSR. Her passport stating born in USSR still blows my mind. A family friend grew up in East Germany. When she's had too much to drink, she gets very nostalgic about it and even sheds some tears. She is very defensive of East Germany and says that as a child it was amazing. Another family friend is from Czech Republic and my boyfriend and his brother are from Slovakia. All born before the split. None of these guys seem to care. They say it's still just the same to them. My husband was born in the GDR, East Germany, and although he is ambivalent about the positives and negatives of the system, he is still sad to effectively not be able to return to the country he grew up in. Nothing is the same there since the collapse of communism. There is a name for that feeling in Germany: Ostalgie. Ost means East in German. I was born in Yugoslavia, mid-80s. It was sad. I lived in a major city largely untouched by direct attack, but we had all three major ethnicities heavily represented and it was incredibly confusing as to why friends stopped being friends, families broke up, etc. As kids we understood what was happening, but not why. I remember hiding my next door Muslim neighbor when the military police came. I remember being embarrassed of who I was, even though my family lineage has mixed roots. I remember weeks without electricity, without running water, doing homework by candlelight, military rations, 1 bottle of oil to last months. Flour was scarce. The river would carry sounds of gunfire and explosions. I saw my dad only a few times in 5 years. Afterwards I remember thinking that was lucky. Some didn't see their dads at all. I remember my dad spending what little time he had at home teaching me how to use various guns, just in case. Afterwards, some people lost their minds. One of the soldiers was convinced the enemy was still there, ever present. He would place small explosives that looked like canned food in the cupboards where his wife and kids were, in his mind to protect them. A couple drank themselves to death. I always believed they died in the forest outside the town years ago. The businesses closed. Factories were empty. There was still work for some, but no pay. The currency was worthless. You'd get paid sometimes, in the morning, and by the afternoon it wasn't even enough for a roll of toilet paper. Weird, scary times. Air raid sirens would interrupt soccer games. I remember wondering why I couldn't see some of my friends. Explanations back then didn't make sense. They still don't. For the people that lived, worked and played together, we never wanted that crap. It was pushed on us, manipulated us, played to our fears and insecurities. Maybe it would have happened eventually regardless. My friend's mother was a student when it all happened. Still to this day she won't eat lentils ever because she spent so long eating lentils only. Breaking Czechia from Slovakia wasn't a big deal. In the shadow of the fall of the communism, one day they were simply gone like a lover in the morning and that was alright. True that. I was born and raised in Slovakia, but my parents told me it was pretty much overnight. Politicians decided to do so and everyone just went with it. I was born and still live in one of the ex-Yugoslav republics, Slovenia. I was 3 months old when we declared independence, so I don't remember how the country is fragmented, but I do remember the Bosnian War and the influx of refugees, although I didn't really understand it as a kid. The thing that personally affected me the most about the dissolution of Yugoslavia were the constantly shifting maps. Every year in school we had new maps and each one was different when you looked at the area of Serbia. The reason I'm writing this is because the whole Yugoslav past still has far-reaching consequences in our lives, mainly in the political spheres. Many politicians who were around at the time of the breakup are still active. and the people are harshly divided about the Yugoslav past of the country. Some suffered during the socialist era, and some prospered. Some see it as a great time and some view it as this horrible oppressive regime. It's especially bad when the time immediately after World War II is brought up, because that was the time of, well, changes and horrible actions from the new government's side, and naturally, the politicians try to appeal to one of those groups. It's come to the point where these types of things eclipse every actual problem in the country. There are issues with our public health care. Well, who cares? The opposition to the reforms are communists, and suddenly that's what everyone talks about. There are issues with taxing the independent workers. Sure, but have you heard about a statue that was unveiled for victims of after-war killings? That's what we should talk about. Every single issue is swept away by just shifting the focus to something that happened in the time of Yugoslavia, and who did what and who deserves to be punished, and people who actually lived through those times just eat that crap up, especially the boomers, cause they were directly impacted by the end of the war. The breakup of the Eastern Bloc and USSR affected capitalist countries on the other side of Iron Curtain as well. We had a massive recession in Finland during the early 90s, since USSR was an important business partner during Cold War and now it was gone. A massive deregulation of the banking sector in the 80s, allowing even the smallest businesses to take out foreign loans, probably with a bigger cause. My story is like a breakup that didn't happen, but some 55 years later it's still bitter. So Maldives, small islands in the Indian Ocean no one knew about, especially back then, cause no tourism. We are made up many atolls. An atoll is a group of islands. In our case it's about 200 small islands on average in an atoll. All the atolls are scattered. Interestingly, atoll is from the Maldivian word, atholhu. Anyways, after the Brits left us, because they are so good at protecting LOL, there was tension between the three southernmost and the rest of the country. South was economically prospering, but they didn't want to pay taxes to the government. The Brits armed the southerners, but the South didn't want to take arms against their brothers. They made a Republic of Suvadives. Government heard about it, and there was a lot of tension but no civil war. People were displaced. The main island, which was the economic capital, got ransacked. That's where my grandmother is from. Recently I went there for work and told them I'm the grandson of her, so people welcomed me as their own. It's like everyone has a lot to say against the people from the capital. There's still hostility in their minds, but the times have changed. A majority of the people live in male capital, however they still really want independence. On another note, documents from the British Foreign Ministry shows that their intention was to make a British military base in the south. Since they couldn't do it, they did it to our neighbors Diego Garcia. Pretty much a takeover. Sent the people to a different country on boats and they still live in poverty. On top of that, the island was sold to American army. So it's good we didn't get split and they didn't get annexed. So I'm an American who imports tuna. I've worked and visited the Maldives multiple times a year and talked to people there every day for the last 7 years. No one told me about this, but a lot of interesting Maldives information seems to kinda come out offhand rather than right away from locals, I've noticed. My country still exists, but it's not the same before revolution. People did revolution to just frick themselves. Poor people are still poor, and the more flattery and religious you are, you get a better position. You guess it, where I am from. I was born in USSR, 1982, in Ukraine. The breakup itself was not a big deal. Actually, there were little patriotic feelings of the great country to mourn about. The change from planned communist mode was disastrous. True, but that is a separate thing from the breakup. I was small, but my parents were like, nah, whatever, about the breakup, having more concerns about the economics change. I think their reasoning was like federalization, less centralization of power was somewhat good thing, but not a big deal. I am from North Macedonia and we didn't have that much problems breaking up. Even though we didn't participate in the war, my father was in the JNA, Serbian military, and fighting on their side. Many Macedonians were sent in the war, but luckily my father fled from Serbia and he didn't see the tragic ending. I was born in Romania in '96, so way after the collapse of communism, and even though Romania always was its own nation, it was also just a Soviet satellite state, so the USSR always had influence over there. Anyhow, my mother told me many stories about her time growing up before the collapse and what happened during and after. When she reminisces, she's always telling a positive story, saying good things about her upbringing and way of life, but of course after the collapse everything went to crap immediately. Comparing my childhood to the way things are now, however, things are much better. People flocked out of the country in search of a stable home since they were finally allowed to travel freely, and you can imagine how that alone inhibited the rate at which the country could grow and prosper. But yeah, crap was crazy. People became more bitter since everyone was fighting for scraps and politicians were trying to establish a new government for the first time in decades. Corruption never left because it was a Soviet way of life and they've accepted things to remain the same. Until now the damage still exists, but luckily the country has improved significantly, especially after our ascension into the EU. Last year when HBO released the limited series Chernobyl, I decided to watch it with my mother and she became incredibly nostalgic and shed some tears because I believe for the first time in a long time, she started to clearly see the faults of the way of life in communist Eastern Europe. Everything from the atmosphere to the way of life to the corruption to the behavior, all touched a long lost part of her upbringing. My mother grew up in East Germany. In 1989 she was 21 years old and fled the country when the Austrian-Hungarian border was briefly open and East Germans could get that way to the west. She left everything behind. Her friends, her family, her mother. She illegally left the country in the belief that she'd never see any of those people ever again. 4 weeks after the flight, the wall in Berlin fell. So looking back, all the effort to leave the country was pretty useless. She said it was weird. Many East Germans couldn't handle the newly gained freedom of living in a Western country, unified Germany. But overall it was a great thing that the wall fell and both parts reunited. She gets very emotional when talking about that time. I was 9 when the wall came down. At first this was absolutely great. We could now travel to the west, got all those shiny things we only knew from West German television. Then the fuck up started. A lot of people lost a big chunk of their savings due to the currency changeover and then lost their jobs. Profiteers streamed into Eastern Germany and screwed people over because they were way too trusting and naive. It took a lot of years to unify East and West Germany, and after 30 years some people are still struggling. For me it was the best that could have happened. A lot of things could have been handled better, but the overall outcome is still one of Germany's greatest achievements. Do parents count? My dad lived in East Pakistan until he was about 6 years old, and that's when it was freed and called Bangladesh. I'm told that there's now a generational split. Those who lived under rule have terrible memories and usually support one party, and those born after its 70s and further are more sympathetic to the extremist side because they didn't live it. Not I, but my grandfather migrated from what became Indian Punjab to Pakistani Punjab. The British divided the country before they left in a hurry after World War II, and the resulting chaos claimed a lot of lives. The train that was taking him to Lahore was stopped on the way and looted by goons. If you didn't have money, they would slice you up with swords and daggers. He told me of other trains that arrived full of dead bodies. This is just his personal story. Read up about the 1947 partition of India if you want. As an Indian, if this guy's grandfather was only looted, he might have been on one of the luckiest trains of the partition. He told me of other trains that arrived full of dead bodies. Only dead bodies. Entire trains of them. On both sides. If you're planning to read about partition, be prepared. I was born in Sarajevo, Yugoslavia in the 80s. I was a wee lad when the war started. It was confusing at first, but luckily my father did not mess around. He put my mum, grandmother, and I on the last airplane out of the city before the airport was shut down and the city went under siege. I experienced the war as a refugee, going from Belgrade to Zagreb to Neum to Dubrovnik. Each place had their own pent-up hatred for another ethnicity or two. I had to always pretend to be on the majority side as we moved. I would get asked by other kids and parents about my family, their names and backgrounds. I had to go to church and take religion classes in some places to fit in. It was weird how all the kids hated their classmates just because their parents passed their hatred down. The weird part was everyone, even us in 3rd grade, was aware of the ethnic cleaning, villages being burned, and people being killed senselessly. Going back has been strange. Each place I would go to, they would be confused by my accent. In Croatia, I would sound Serbian. In Bosnia I would sound Croatian. In Herzegovina I would sound Bosnian, so I would never be able to fit in. My wife and I got married in Croatia, and I hope that one day we travel with our son where some of the weirdness can be gone, and that we can show him all of the historic sites and the beauty of the Dalmatia without a fuss. PS. Thanks on the question OP. Made my morning a bit brighter thinking about my childhood, and knowing my son will not have to endure anything of what I've been through. I live in a country that has never existed, North Cyprus. We go under the name the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, but we are only recognized by Turkey. I'm hating the comment for some reason. I just stated the fact that I was a Turkish Cypriot. That's it. There are thousands upon thousands of stories about how people from both sides suffered during the 1974. For example, the wooden door at my grandma's living room has a square replacement within of a different color. During the conflicts, there was a live grenade thrown from the balcony, through that door, and into the kitchen. My aunt was in that kitchen, and a live grenade blew up meters from her. Like I said before, there's both sides to a story. I'm in no way, shape or form saying that Greek Cypriots are bad people. In fact, they're the very opposite. I love them. The past is in the past. We must find a way to unite Cyprus and have peace. I am personally attending communal youth activities with hundreds of Greek Cypriots to promote peace and unite Cyprus, and I have made tons and tons of friends. So, I am begging you, please don't start hating towards someone just because of their nationality. Fascism is the last thing I want to experience today. I am not from there myself, but I wonder if Somalia would be another valid example. It is still depicted on maps, but that has been a fiction since the 1990s. What is actually there within the former borders is Somaliland, Puntland, the Shabab Empire, and the city-state of Mogadishu. I was born in 1985 in Mitrovica, Yugoslavia. Mitrovica is now part of Croatia. My mom was Croatian and my dad was Serbian. I still consider myself as Yugoslavian. I was only a kid, but I do remember uncles and cousins getting killed over the years while the war was raging. As for my immediate family, we moved around a lot. We lived in Cyprus for 6 months, until they deported us. We then moved to Belgrade, Serbia. From there we went to Romania. We lived there for 2 years and once again moved back to Belgrade and applied to come to Canada. We were accepted and in September 1995 we arrived to Calgary, Canada. I now live in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. I was born in Yugoslavia and it was like losing your limbs together. They had so much potential, but alone they were destined to fail. My parents are from Croatia, but they didn't live in Yugoslavia in 1991, but they regularly visited their families. My dad was glad when Croatia declared independence. My mother's family was more concerned since they were living in Dalmatia. My mom told me this story that on the day Milan Babic declared the state of war over the Krajina, her family fled their homes the same day, but my dad, he wanted to see what is happening there, so he decided to drive to Benkovac, a town occupied by Serb rebels. He thought of it as an adventure, but they could have easily killed him if they found out that he was a Croat. Luckily, nothing happened to him and he returned. I was born after the war, but my parents told me a lot of stories, so here is few of them. Sorry for bad English. Before my dad went to war, him and mom were traveling around Bosnia, that area of XYU, when they were heading back to their city, not knowing that war had already started in nearby cities. They almost drove into open war zone in one village. Thank God they spotted a guy running and waving to them to go back. After that my dad went to war and my mom was hiding somewhere in the mountains with other people. Dad was going to many cities, and his most shocking story he told us about is the time when they were deployed to some unknown small village where Turkish soldiers were training them. Long story short, Turkish soldiers were very unfriendly and they forced them to exercise, pray and respect their rules. I don't know how they escaped. He never told us. but they managed to. Dad's cousin was in the first lines and he confessed to us that they would give tons of drugs and alcohol to soldiers. Mom's cousin was a photographer during the war. He still has images and videos till this day, but he never published most of it. And he is mentally scared for life. He drinks a lot and he is out of this world. My grandfather was robbed and shot, but he survived. My aunt's husband was almost killed in the middle of nowhere. He was drunk and he passed out on some field near border. My mom had no food and no money to escape to other country. She would say how horrible those times were. There were many stories, but I told few of them. It is supremely sad to lose your nation. I was born in HK, so I was British subject, which is great because we are big Anglophiles, and almost all our best students go to UK universities. But now we are forced to take China's nationality, which is revolting, since that country's moronic leaders and compliant citizens were a complete joke to HKers. Just reference any HK movie made about China in the 1970s. The political situation has sunk so low in HK, it's like the inmates have taken over the asylum. No words to say about the current situation. I can only hope and pray that the situation in Hong Kong would end. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.